Hello everyone, this is Father Michael. Hello, and I'm coming to you on location here in the upstairs of the St. Francis Rectory. So very exotic new spot for us. Today is Divine Mercy Sunday, so happy Divine Mercy Sunday. I have my image of Divine Mercy here to accompany us on this journey today. Today, to begin our Eyewitness series, our Witnesses to the Resurrection series, we're going to focus on the Apostle St. Thomas, who appears so vividly today in our gospel passage. So we know St. Thomas is featured a lot in the gospel. He's actually in all three of the synoptic gospels, the gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and he's mentioned as one of the apostles in all of those. But really it's in the Gospel of John that we see him most, when he is featured in the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. So when Jesus says he wants to go back to Bethany where Lazarus is, Thomas says to the rest of the apostles, let us go as well. Let us go with Jesus so that we might die with him. The reason he says that is because he believes that Jesus, if he goes back there, will die, which is a good bet because the authorities at that time already wanted to kill Jesus. And so he's saying to the rest of the guys, let's go back and we can die with him. Let's have a heroic death with Jesus. And then the next time we see Thomas is at the Last Supper, or the next time he speaks is at the Last Supper, when Jesus is talking about where he's going. Jesus is saying, where I'm going, you know the way. And Thomas is kind of like, well, hold up. We don't know where you're going. How would we know where you're going? So we won't know the way. And Jesus tells him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But what we see already with Thomas, even before this account of the resurrection that we get today in our gospel, is that he is already kind of a guy who's not afraid to say what he's thinking. He's not afraid to share what he's feeling, and he wants to know and understand things from his own experience. He wants to be able to see things for himself. And I think that is good to recognize, because then we come to the gospel and we see him not there with the apostles when Jesus comes the first time, and when they tell him about the resurrection, that Jesus is real, that he's come. So Thomas hears all of this from the other apostles and he's like, nope, can't believe that. That is way too much. I need more proof than that. I need to put my finger into his side, or put my hand in his side and put my finger into the palms of his hands. And not until that do I see that will I believe. Of course, we know the rest of the story, that it's the next week and Thomas is there with the rest of the apostles, and Jesus comes into their midst, says, peace be with you, and then he singles out Thomas and says, Thomas, come here. Put your finger into my palm, put your hand into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believe. And then Thomas says that great statement of faith, my Lord and my God. So let's stop there and kind of look at the apostle Thomas and see what he can offer us today, what his example and his witness really show us. I think a lot of times that he gets a bad rap for being the guy who's, he's doubting Jesus and his resurrection. But really, I think that there's kind of an honesty to the way that Thomas is, that he really has trouble believing this when he hears it from the other disciples. And so he's honest about that. He says, I can't believe that. And I think that what it is with Thomas is that he kind of knows what he feels. He knows what he's going through. All of the disciples are grieving the loss of Jesus, and they're struggling with that. And Thomas seems to struggle by himself when he's away from them. And so to hear that Jesus is back, to hear that that he could be raised from the dead is a hard thing to hear, because it would be a risky thing to believe if he can't see that for himself. If he believes that and it's not true, it'd be like going through all of that grief, all of that sadness again, a second time, and that would be way too much to bear for Thomas, for anyone really. But I think what Thomas does, and that is so maybe admirable, you could say, is that he recognizes how he feels and he can name that. He might not name it right out to his friends as the other apostles, but he knows that he's sad and he knows that he's grieving. And because of that, he knows he doesn't want to go through that again without real tangible proof that Jesus is really raised from the dead. But I think that's important. I think that's important to realize, because Thomas recognizes his emotions, and because he recognizes his emotions, he can allow himself then to bring those emotions to Jesus when he actually sees him for real. He's aware of himself, and because of that, then he brings that to Jesus later that next week, and he is converted to a deeper, more transformative faith. So he's able to name those emotions, and I think that it also it makes it easier for him to offer it to Jesus, but it also probably makes it easier for the other apostles. I think if they've got any doubts or fears with all of this, that they can maybe be honest with themselves and with each other about, this is where I'm doubting, this is where I'm kind of afraid. And I think that it's important to say that it's not about them, taking that on as their whole persona, but to be able to acknowledge those places that aren't totally sure within them, and then to bring that to the Lord. Because Thomas is able to acknowledge those feelings, he's able to face them, and he's able to allow those things to be transformed by Jesus. He encounters Jesus, and then he believes beyond belief, beyond the other apostles. So none of them called Jesus their Lord and God. Only Thomas did. That is the most full expression of faith that we have in the whole New Testament, because he acknowledges that Jesus is the Lord, but also that Jesus is God. And we've not heard that yet. So what we learn from Thomas's witness, I think, is that we must as well be willing to name and identify our emotions and how we're feeling. It's something called like emotional intelligence, something I've learned a lot about more recently in my life, and something that I've been trying to practice myself. I think especially during a time like this, a time that is totally unprecedented in our history, we don't know what to do with our emotions. We don't know how to deal with our emotions. And a lot of us, if we are parents or leaders or teachers or whatever, we feel that there's a kind of a burden on us to at least appear that we know like what we're doing, that we have it all together, or that we are okay with everything, or that everything's going to be okay. But honestly, we don't know that. From all worldly standards, everything looks like it's falling apart. And that's hard. It's easy for us to feel like we have to be a certain way, but we really are feeling a lot of things deeper, a lot of confusion, a lot of doubt. And that's hard to deal with. And sometimes we can push those emotions away and act like they aren't there. But like Thomas, we really need to look at those things and acknowledge them, to validate our feelings, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is that because it's only when we acknowledge them, when we can name them, that we can then bring them to Jesus, offer them to Jesus to be transformed. When we understand our emotions, we are able then to offer them to Jesus. It's like once we can identify the problem, then we can find solutions for it. Thomas offers that grief and his unbelief to Jesus when he sees him, and he doesn't pretend to be something he's not. He desires to make his faith his own. He wants to know for sure for himself. I think, friends, that the resurrection for us is something that is unbelievable. Like Thomas, it's hard for us to believe in something so amazing, so totally life-changing. And I think that's part of the whole mystery of it, that it should baffle us. It should baffle the world that Jesus rose from the dead. And the good news with that is that it's transforming beyond our beliefs, beyond our wildest dreams, what the good news of the resurrection can do. Through the power of that resurrection, then our feelings can be transformed. Now, when I say that, it's not like Jesus is some fairy godfather who comes in and like totally just plucks away all of the grief or all of the sadness or whatever it is that we're feeling that we don't like and makes it all totally better. It's not that, but what our faith in the resurrection does, and offering that to Jesus, is that it allows us to see things from a different perspective. Jesus offers a new perspective and maybe see some things that we didn't see before. Offers us hope that this isn't going to be forever, and that things can get better. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, yes, right now life is very difficult, and I'm not trying to say that it's anything but that, really. Social distancing sucks. I hate it. And, you know, now that schools are closed for the rest of the year, I'm grieving the loss of the ability to go and visit the kids at our St. Francis school. It's going to be a lot of headaches and heartaches for the teachers, for the students, for the parents, especially for those students who are graduating this year, who won't be able to go back to school. But I think what our resurrection faith does is it doesn't look at any situation, even this one, as hopeless. Rather, it always believes, that resurrection faith always believes in Jesus's power to transform our lives, to transform us over and over again, to bring resurrection out of death, and believes that Jesus can conquer any evil that we experience through the good news of the resurrection. So friends, today, let us look to St. Thomas to be perhaps our guide in recognizing our own feelings and what we're dealing with. And let us bring whatever those things are to Jesus. Allow him to transform those thoughts, feelings, emotions, so that we might be transformed by his resurrection.